Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the International House at UC Berkeley. I am Nayeli Vivanco, the Vice President for the Robertson Center for Intercultural Leadership and Programs. Thank you for joining us today to our Lodestar Executive Director Speaker Series. Before we commence, I would like to emphasize on one of IHOU's fundamental values: respect. At iHouse, we prioritize providing a platform for open and thoughtful discussions, upholding the principles of freedom of speech and respectful discourse. As you know, free speech is fundamental to an inclusive society. And the strength of our collective voice lies in our ability to respect diverse viewpoints, even when they differ from your own. So today, I invite you to create a space together where ideas and opinions can be exchanged respectfully, and differences can be bridged through a constructive dialogue. On this International Women's Day, a moment to recognize the significant contributions of women throughout history, I would like to express my gratitude to Chancellor Christ for her pivotal role in creating spaces for women like myself in higher education. Please join me in welcoming our Chancellor.
It's wonderful to get a rose. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for this opportunity to celebrate a wonderful program, an extraordinary alumnus, and a truly essential element of what makes our university so special. The program is, of course, the Lodestar Speaker Series, an offering of the Robertson Center for Intercultural Leadership and Programs. Its aim and purpose could not be closer to my heart, and that is to bring our community together for meaningful dialogue that sparks curiosity, inspiration, and intercultural understanding. If that doesn't connect deeply with some of our most fundamental values, I don't know what would. The alum in question, that would be Eric Schmidt, of course, and he'll be in conversation today with Shaun Carver, the iHouse CEO and Executive Director. And the topic could not be more timely: the promise and perils of AI. Eric, of course, is an iHouse alum, a steadfast friend and supporter of our university. He's also the co-founder of Schmidt Futures, an extension of his work to promote social good, support innovation, and coach the next generation of exceptional people to tackle the world's biggest challenges. If Eric doesn't sound like someone who embodies our fundamental values, I don't know who would. And then there's iHouse, one of the true jewels of the Cal Crown. International House has been part of the campus community for almost 100 years. Its mission is to bring together a diverse community to live and learn together and to foster intercultural respect and understanding, lifelong friendships, and leadership skills for a more just and peaceful world. With over 100,000 alumni, including 2 California governors, 9 Nobel laureates, royalty, ambassadors, diplomats, leaders in the free speech and civil rights movements, entrepreneurs, California Supreme Court justices, and countless others. And I think you know where I'm going with this. If the iHouse doesn't represent, support, and advance some of our most important values and objectives, I truly do not know what does. I want especially to thank Chevron, the sponsor of today's event. It's wonderful to see every element of our community here together: students, faculty, alumni, staff, and friends of the campus. And I'm very much looking forward to the discussion that awaits. It's my pleasure now to invite and welcome Shaun Carver to the stage.
Hello. Thank you. Hi, Carol.
Welcome to iHouse. Today,
I've already been here.
You've spent more days here than I have. You were a resident for 4 years?
That's correct.
I haven't even been on the job for 4 years. So,
Okay.
Today our topic is AI's implications, specifically how it relates to the mission of iHouse. For those of you unfamiliar, and since this is the Berkeley community, I hope everyone is familiar, but since 1930, for almost 100 years, iHouse has been part of this community, bringing diverse people together for greater understanding and appreciation of different cultures, to learn about different people and different perspectives, and to broaden friendships.
I think you missed the point.
Did I?
I met my wife here. Okay. Okay, so let's get the facts straight.
All right.
Okay, children, grandchildren, all that shit. Okay. iHouse.
iHouse.
We're in favor of reproduction.
So we're going to get into your memorable moments, but hopefully we can keep it
That's it.
safe for work.
What else is important?
In our 94th year, we have over 1,000 documented relationships and marriages that have spawned out of this community, and Eric is one of them. So we strongly believe that bringing diverse groups of people together works. You learn about folks, you understand them better, you don't see them as labels, you're more likely to engage in conversations, to understand people. And we think that makes the world a more just and peaceful world. Today, we are host to over 600 international and domestic residents here at iHouse. They're from 75 different nationalities, and we have diverse representations in ethnic, racial, religious, economic, gender, academic areas of study, just to name a few. What did you study?
Computer science.
We have a few of those as well.
Hey, by the way, it is the biggest major in the campus.
It is. We, purposely try to avoid any group having an overrepresentation within iHouse. So if
discrimination against computer scientists.
We support diversity in all of ways.
Look, he's got this script he's trying to follow.
No, I can roll with you, Eric. I can roll with you. So we're going to look and talk about AI in the context of iHouse mission of creating a more peaceful world, of bringing people together. And so, Eric, before we get into today, I would like to talk a bit about your experiences, the safe for work experiences that you had here at iHouse.
Yeah. Well, first, there's a couple of my friends in the front audience, and I will tell you they look exactly the same. One still has hair, and the other one still doesn't have hair. This was true 45 years ago. It's unchanged. And they're fantastic. I came to iHouse. I was young. I was a year younger than everybody else. And I wanted a place. I had grown up in Italy partly. This was at a time when the world was a little less global. And I wanted a place which did in fact represent the cultures of the world. And what was interesting in my first year at iHouse is I realized that every stereotype is true at iHouse. The French are this way, the Swiss are that way, the Germans are this way, the Chinese are this way, and so forth. So you reinforced all of my prejudices. But the mixing was the gift. And it's important to understand the contribution that iHouse made to my career. Well, what I would do is I would walk to basically Evans. Now you would walk to Corey, which is a little farther. So I'd walk back and forth, and I had a motorcycle, which I parked in a little parking lot, which is sort of insane. And I met all of these very, very interesting people. What did it do? It taught me the thing that people didn't know when I was here in America, that the world is much bigger than the US. And that principle meant that when I, for example, went to Google in my first week, I looked at the map and I said, most of the revenue's from the US. And I told the sales guy, go to Europe, open up all the offices, and don't come back until you're done. He foolishly followed my direction as his boss, went and in 4 days created an institution that is now 60% of a $200 billion revenue stream, right? That's iHouse. So thank you.
I spent 13 years living in China, living overseas.
Oh my God.
I think
China?
during the glory year from 2002, they had just been awarded the Olympics. Beijing was changing and developing in preparation for really kind of opening up to the world and all of this infrastructure and changes and modernization. And then I moved to Shanghai during the World Expo and saw how that city was changing and developing and opening up. And certainly it's gone in a different direction now. But it was really stepping outside of the U.S. and being exposed and immersed in a different culture that allowed me to have a different perspective of the U.S. And I think in some ways, if you don't have the luxury of going overseas and spending a quarter of your life in a different culture, being immersed in this community where you're surrounded by differences and differences of opinions. I remember I would go to a expat place for a beverage in Beijing and be surrounded by Europeans and Australians and New Zealand and folks from all over that had a very different perspective of the U.S. and our government and our policies and our role in the United States. And that's not something I would normally have had in my experiences here.
So what I have learned is the world is always a bigger place than I think about it. I was just in India. India's really big in terms of people, and I'd forgot that. I think we just normalized whatever we see in front of us. So iHouse represents that as a reminder. I do need to tell you that I used a computer that was very powerful when I was here. The phone that you have in your pocket is at least 100 million times more powerful than all of the computer that I was using and all my friends then. So you're seriously lucky. And for those of you who are here at iHouse, you're starting from a platform that is how many 8 orders of magnitude higher in power than when we did. And so one way to think about it is that that is a communications platform that allows you to send your messages. Now, everyone else has also sent their messages, but I think we collectively believe in globalization, harmony, respect for other folks. And what I learned in living in iHouse was these are real human beings. So they have like real problems. And there's this sort of funny kind of American prejudice against other people, especially like different races, where there's some presumption that they don't want the same things that we do. So I will report to you that every human in the planet wants better education, safety for their kids, air conditioning, better food, a luxury lifestyle, whatever.
And I think that's, one of the things that people get when they move in here to iHouse and then they're surrounded by these different perspectives is that you stop seeing people as labels. When they're outside your community, you label them, and that's how you refer to them. When they're your neighbor or your bunkmate, or you're in the dining hall, or you're in the having coffee hour on Wednesday night in the Great Hall, they become a person, a friend, a colleague, a peer, someone that you share with. You have these deep conversations that lead to better understanding of why people have different perspectives than you.
And what's interesting is that this us versus them that has now appeared is an actual surprise to me. As a good liberal who's a graduate from a largely liberal institution, Berkeley, I've always assumed that the arc of liberalism and fairness and justice was positive, right? And we're seeing a retrenchment globally and a return to tribalism. Here in the United States, of course, we see this every day, but it's kind of true everywhere. I always blame social media for everything, so that's my excuse. There are probably other forces as well. But part of the reason that we have a multi-ethnic, diverse institution like Berkeley is precisely to address that. We are better together as a community. And by the way, what does that mean? Every race, both sexes, any other sexes that exist, all social and religious preferences, we're better off together, right? And I don't know how to say it any clearer.
Yeah, as much conflict that there is on community campuses right now, it's amazing that we haven't seen it here within our community. And I think it's because, diversity does work.
It does.
Getting people down to talk about it helps and moves us in the right direction. So you raised a couple of things that I want to touch on. And before we get into kind of the AI topic, I would confess I am a techno optimist. You talked about your first computer. My dad was in the electronics industry in the 60s, and my first computer was a TRS-80 Radio Shack. And I've had...
By the way, he's older than he looks. That's what that tells you.
Sadly, that's true. And You know, I've loved technology. I seem to always be an early adopter. I get excited about new stuff and seeing how it's changing our lives and making things better. But I find I'm less of an optimist today.
Mhm.
And part of that started, I think, with social media. And I have two young children, 9 and 11 years old. And to see the impact social media can have on them and seeing what it's doing to other young people and the dangers and perils and what it's doing to mental health and self-harm rates, I don't want to put them on it. I don't want to allow them to be on it. Why would I? However, I know the future, they're going to have to be comfortable in that world. And so I'm faced with this duality of, but I see how we progressed with social media. We launched it into society, I'm sure with good intentions, hoping to bring people together and connect folks like we do here at IOS, but just in a virtual, global way. And somehow it's gone down a path where it's not that anymore. It's made us more isolated. It's made us more insulated from other ideas. It's made us intellectually arrogant. We don't want to listen to anyone else's opinion. Mine is right and you are wrong and we are not okay. And so I feel kind of, we haven't learned from this. And here we are with AI launching these tools into society without understanding the implications of that. We can't regulate it because we don't understand it. So how, and it's moving at the speed of Moore's law, right? So how are we possibly going to keep up? And I feel like we're going to be looking back, instead of 20 years after the launch of social media, 5 years after the launch of AI, looking back and saying, wow, we didn't know it was going to be like this. And how do we unwind this and make this more of a positive?
I was heavily involved with the first steps of social media, and I would give these speeches about kind of connecting the entire world, basically having all these sort of friends and so forth and so on. And we were right for about 10 years, in my view, until the algorithms took over. And I'll talk about that in a sec. But all of us, and I'm clearly guilty of this, assumed that it was a net benefit to connect the world. And I still believe that. But I now understand something that I didn't understand before. And I think it's because I came to Berkeley, which is a place of relative respect for other people, and you teach it, and if somebody gets out of line, you put them back in together, that human societies are not organized that way. Human societies are, in fact, tribal. And I learned in managing YouTube, which I was in charge of for about a decade, among other things, is that the power of a video is much stronger than the power of a text, any form of text. So lies in a video cause people to get killed, largely because of religious issues. And these religious things are often promoted or generated by evil politicians who are trying to gain power at the expense of people. And we've seen this in many countries. The issue of your teenagers is quite profound. I've written a series of articles, including with Nicholas Haidt, about the damage that we're doing to young people and how to actually put some guardrails on social media. It looks to me like we're going to make the same mistakes again with AI. The social media mistake can be understood as follows. If I were an evil social media CEO, which I'm not, and I wanted to maximize revenue, the best way I could maximize revenue is to maximize engagement. And the best way to maximize engagement is to maximize outrage. Why is everyone unhappy all the time? The algorithm is making you unhappy because the messages of comity and collaboration don't generate ad revenue. But what you'll see typically is, I'll make a false claim. Did you know that the moon landing was faked, and now there's evidence at UT Austin, which is a fine institution that has proven, I wouldn't say Berkeley, has proven that it was a fake, and you have been duped. Okay, that's going to do a lot better than it's the anniversary of the moon landing, and wasn't it a long time ago? Okay, now this group would say, oh, it's nice this was the anniversary of the moon landing, and we should think about that and reflect on it. Well, that precisely is counter to the algorithm and the revenue expectations. And the real shift occurred in around 2015 when the linear feeds became weaponized. And once you understand that, and you as a consumer and with your family, you can educate your children and so forth about this. The problem is we don't agree with this in principle. I've tried repeatedly in the Congress to get various forms of legislation and passed in this area. And for all sorts of reasons, people get confused between human speech and computer speech. I want you to know that I personally believe in absolute right for absolute human speech, including hate speech, which means speech that I don't like because I don't like hate speech. I am not in favor of the same rights to computers, right? So if you think about social media as not a human speech, but rather as an amplifier of the most extreme speech, then the companies are complicit. And they're complicit because it's a capitalistic system, and that needs regulation. So in AI, there's a lot of concern about things like bias and so forth, because AI, as you know, is trained on real world data, and there's plenty of bias in the world. There's computer scientists here at Berkeley and elsewhere who work on algorithms to normalize these biases, get rid of them, and so forth. That's all relatively straightforward. The real problem is going to be deepfakes. And here's how it's going to work. It is possible to make videos that I can't see the difference now. This is in the last month or two, where I cannot tell the difference. The voice seems authentic, the mouth is moving, the head is moving, sounds like the person. And the way I would do it if I were an evil person trying to achieve this, which hopefully I'm not, is I would simply flood the market with these things, and I would make all sorts of, and I would have the computer generate. Remember, I can generate it, so I generate the messaging and so forth. I'll give you a simple example. A demo that was done recently is, let's use a stereotype, a Hispanic woman, 25 years old with 2 kids. And she's fake. So you say to the LLM, generate this woman and generate her entire message system, which consists of perfectly normal concerns for a Hispanic woman with 2 kids, 25-year-olds, but she's convinced that the Biden administration is going to harm her kids because of their program of X, right? And she's on it. Okay, that seems fairly straightforward. You release that, it looks like a proper person, the systems take it and uptake it. Then you take that person, which you've just generated, and you feed it back into the system with the following command. Write a program to generate 500 variants of people with different ethnicities, different sex, different backgrounds, who collectively make the same point, but are otherwise different. Boom. Now we have a whole community. Now we've built an entire influencing campaign over a completely false thing. Now, how long does this take? An hour. What kind of computing capabilities does it take? A PC. Okay, that's what we're dealing with. Now, the answer, by the way, for the social media companies, because that's the primary way in which most people globally will encounter these things, which includes, by the way, TikTok. So they're going to have serious, serious protections against this. Why do they not do it? Technical incompetence, a lot of priorities, distraction, but there's one more. They make money from the falsehoods. So you see how there's a misalignment of our societal interest with what's going to happen. That's not the most interesting thing about AI that's going to happen. I'll mention that in a sec. But this is the one that puts democracies at risk. There are roughly 2 billion people who are voting in democracies this year. This puts democracies at risk. It's a hard problem. And by the way, you notice I didn't say nation state, I didn't say North Korea, I didn't say Russia hacking into the US. I said crazy people. What is your estimate of crazy people in America? It's not 0.001%. Some of you may say 50%, some may 10%, some may 5%, but it's not the null set, right? It's a substantive set of people. Roughly 10% in the recent survey I saw of Americans are nihilists, which means they oppose all forms of statehood, right? So they're a good example of people who might be corrupted by this system. The real thing that's going to happen, which I think is impossible to predict, is not the LLM revolution, which is largely, I think, good and largely under control. I've worked a lot on AI safety, and I can describe where I think that is. But the next round of technology will allow what I call text to action. And specifically, these are systems which take language in and they produce programs out. Now, I'm a computer scientist, so I care a lot about this. So here's an example. Go through my photos and and using other forms of input, label everyone in my own photos, which the systems won't do, and only do if it's legal in the country I'm sitting in, because it's illegal in many countries. Okay, that's an easy one. Another one, go through my contact list, look up all the dead people, since I know a whole bunch of people who are older, and delete the ones that are dead. And you can ask me if they're dead, and to make sure. Sorry to be macabre, but you get the point. Okay, that's pretty interesting. You're running a company. Take all the resumes that are coming in, sort them by GPA and other suitability frameworks that you have learned. Decide whom to offer a job to, consistent with the corporate guidelines, make them an offer, and close the deal. And write a program to do so. So when you begin to think that every idea you have can be translated into software that can, as long as there's an API into the real world, right? So things like open the door and things like that are easy because there's an interface that allows the door to be automatically open. You have an enormous expansion of power for individuals. Now, to me, in many ways, this is extraordinary because it means that somebody working can just have an idea and they don't need to have a programmer who are generally obnoxious, difficult, painful, and expensive, speaking as one, right? You don't need them. You don't need me. You can just say what you want and it happens. So your ability as a non-programmer to affect action in your business, in your creativity is phenomenal, but obviously it also has negative scenarios as well. We are, as a society, are not ready for this at all. And the reason is because we're used to having elites who can more or less behave maybe, but this thing is available to everybody, right? In the world I'm describing, this technology is available to everyone, educated and uneducated, poor, rich, powerful, mentally ill, pick whatever name, maybe that's a combination. You get the idea. And this instability, you're an actual foreign policy expert as opposed to me who's making it up. I don't think we have a model for nation state power in a world where individuals have so much autonomy. The way the autocracies have solved this problem is they simply ban it. So they don't have this problem. They have other problems. And I personally like democracy, and I'm sure you all do. All of us would prefer the freedoms in the West. There's no question, right? So the question is, what freedom are you willing to give up in order to constrain this, right? And what power are the autocracies willing to give up in order to enable it? So far, the autocracies, by the way, are doing what you would predict. They're getting tighter and tougher and more restrictive, which is why America is doing better, which is an interesting and non-obvious conclusion.
You talked a bit about, how these language-based programming, and I think it was Jensen Huang, right? NVIDIA a couple of weeks ago talked about there's no need for learning coding anymore. You need to learn how to prompt, how to explain what you want the AI to do for you, and it'll create the program. But much to the chagrin to a lot of our computer science folks who've been spending a lot of time learning how to do programming, they'll soon be replaced by AI, I'm sure. What does that mean to languages? 75 different nationalities here, lots of different languages spoken. We're in the second year of UNESCO. It has the a decade of indigenous language to bring awareness to the 3,000 endangered languages that are disappearing. As we are looking in the development of AI, and especially language-based AI, is it going to bias folks who speak English as a first language, Mandarin, Hindi, French, and Spanish? Will they have an advantage in the early development before it trickles down to these other languages, or can AI and these tools incorporate other languages for other populations of the world?
So part of the reason LLMs started in English first is the users were English speakers, but more importantly, there was an infinite amount of training data. So one of the things that I did not quite grasp is the amount of data that's in English versus other languages. Now, the majority of users on the internet are Chinese right now, if you look in terms of numerically. And they're Chinese. The Chinese diaspora, of course, is very large. If you add it all up, it's Chinese. But the content is first and foremost English. So there is a discrimination in the algorithms and training based on the quantity. Now, technically, you can solve that problem with synthetic data. So let's say you pick some crazy language that nobody speaks, more or less. You can generate all of the necessary language variations in order to have an equal shot at training. So that's probably solvable. So I don't think there's going to be very much of a discrimination. Every country I know of that has multiple languages is now either in universities or government or quasi-nonprofit groups trying to work to build LLMs that are very fluent. So for example, I've done a lot of funding in France, and the French people who care a lot about their language complain that the American LLMs have casually learned French, right? Which is sort of the equivalent of saying you Americans. And they're right, by the way. So it sure looks like for well-funded countries with big languages like French, you will end up with beautiful French-speaking systems. It's not as obvious that you will with others, but certainly we'll be able to go back and forth. We've known for a long time that we can do dynamic translation. So you should expect, just as here I am in a building I was in 45 years ago where I have a phone with me, and there's presumably a very powerful Wi-Fi internet, which none of this was invented when I was here, you should expect that there will be devices that will allow people just to communicate through naturally without quite seamlessly. That technology, I think, is solved.
I think as we see within our community here that even though there's a common language, there's a lot of misunderstanding still.
Yeah. You know, I was in Ukraine, and there was a big to-do in the train, and of course the lady who's in the train doesn't speak English, and I don't speak Ukrainian, and so we're busy. I'm asking her a question, and we're using Google Translate. Right. Just think about that. Right. It's just like, wow. Right. So that's going to be the norm. And I think one of the things that is true is that the globalization has many, many positive effects, the intermixing, which I think iHouse represents, but also think about the airline industry, a global industry, the transportation industry, the shipping industry, these incredibly inexpensive goods that we can move around, the supply chains that exist globally. And people who are focused tribally are trying to break those supply chains. But we benefit as a society by those interconnections because it makes us, in my view, it promotes peace. So to be very clear, I've said to the US government many, many times, the best thing about China is to take their young people, bring them to the US and educate them, right? That is the best strategy for peace. And it makes no sense to somebody in Washington, which there's a long list of things that doesn't make any sense to them, but I'm sure I'm right, that you're just better off building those communities and that knowledge and that understanding in the same sense that you spent all those years in China.
And during that time, I still don't feel I'm an expert on the culture for society. I would also say that, while we can have translators, and certainly, having a Google translator with on your train in Ukraine, but there's a deeper understanding that happens when you learn someone else's language, that gives you more insight into their culture. And I'm wondering if eventually there'll be no need to learn a second language because our technology is taking care of that for us, but we're giving up learning and respecting other folks.
When I was here, I had my advisor was Bob Fabry, and this sounds nerdy, but it'll make the point.
It's Berkeley.
It's Berkeley. And I was, show you how old I am, I was studying the Burroughs 6600 architecture, which the very old people will understand what I just said. Sorry to call you old. And it really was that bad. And I said, this thing sucks. And in some, in impressed way that a 23-year-old would say it. And my advisor said, you might check that. You might, instead of saying that and be so certain, maybe you should try to figure out why it's so successful if it sucks so much. And he caught me. This is what a good advisor does. He's since retired. And what I realized was he taught me a lesson, which is there was a reason why this particular architecture, and I had to learn it. So I studied it. I understood why it was so successful, and I hated it more. Okay? But that's what your language example is. In order to understand English, you need to understand non-English. That doesn't mean you have to like the other language.
You had mentioned one of your earlier answers, sometimes the AI needs to create data where there is no data. And recently, Google has faced some criticism for the generative AI system that has inserted diversity into historical contexts where there wasn't any. As I was reading through, the articles that were talking about this in preparations, I noticed in the prompts they never really gave direction to the AI to put it in a historical context. It was, give me a rendering of our founding fathers. And the expectation was it was going to be historical representation and not the Hamilton version of our founding fathers. Is it an issue with we just haven't learned how to ask the right questions to get what we want? Or is it something within the AI programming that is looking to insert diversity into areas where it isn't?
It turns out it's both. So the correct query is, I want a photorealistic picture of the things that would have been occurred in 1800, including accurate outcomes, accurate representation of people, representing the construction of how society was then. That's the correct query. Instead, it was, show me a historical representation. So the systems need more specificity in order to understand what you want. This tells me that for the next 5 or 10 years, until the press gets tired about it, we're going to get an article every day about how stupid these systems are. Maybe because it's a threat to the press, I don't really know. But the fact of the matter is that language is very, very powerful. That's why these training systems are so good. But it's also pretty ambiguous. That's a hot dog. Did I just say? Did I say hot dog or hot dog? Which one? You heard the timing. The computer didn't hear it. Doesn't hear the difference because it tokenizes the words. So there's going to be example after example of that. The reason it's also the internal model is I don't know because I'm not at Google anymore, but my guess is that, so let me explain how these things work. You take a gazillion numbers of computers, and Google has a gazillion more than anybody else. Thank you. And Google has a larger number of the talent in AI than anyone else in the world. Thank you. And you take all that together, and you take all that training data, and you crunch away. The way the algorithm works, it's called gradient descent. You basically take the words, you tokenize them, and then the math, the technique was invented at Google in 2017. It's called transformers. And you go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth trillions and trillions of times. And that back and forth is a mathematical algorithm that approximates the content of information. And crazily, these systems predict the next word in a sequence. That's all they do. But they're so good, the math is so good that the writing is fluent. What really happened was at OpenAI, and it annoys me no end that it was at OpenAI, not at Google, as we built the infrastructure that they used, but they invented it. They were at one night, they're basically sitting there and they turn GPT-3 on and it's like a college level writer. And they go, holy crap, right? This is like a skill it's a genuine invention in history that occurred in San Francisco. It was a Thursday on a particular, about 3 years ago. And then what they did is they scaled up. Then you do a process which is called fine tuning. And fine tuning can be understood as adjusting the answers. And so the theory in the industry is that this particular issue occurred because they didn't quite get the fine tuning right. And you want to do the fine tuning because the systems, the raw versions, which you've never seen because they've never been released, have many dangerous pieces of knowledge: how to kill someone, how to build a bad drug, how to build a bomb, how to build a nuclear bomb, and so forth. And so they carefully remove all of that before you ever see it, which is a good thing to do. And I've worked a lot on AI, trust and safety, and there's a whole now program, and there's one here at Berkeley and so forth working on these things. But the errors that you're describing are likely occur in fine tuning. We will eventually get that composite set of information right, at least in a particular culture.
Is it just going through the learning process of
it's
failure, learning
look,
from the failure? And
GPT 3.5 came out in November of a year ago, basically a little more than a year. I mean, give me a break, right? Are you really that impatient? This is one of the most transformative technologies invented in the world. Remember, what AI is building intelligence analogous to human intelligence, but not the same at a global scale. The result of AI is that the price of intelligence will go down and the availability of intelligence will go up. The optimistic way to say this, and I'll make this up because I don't have a way of proving it, imagine if every single person in the world becomes twice as productive because they have an AI that assists them in whatever they're trying to do. So let's be precise. You'll get sued twice as much by lawyers. You'll get twice as good healthcare from doctors. The education system will be twice as good. The teachers can teach twice as many students, which is a big deal. I mean, go on and on and on. So if you view AI not as a threat, which is the way it's typically described, but rather as something which makes you smarter, then you have a very different view of it. A non-version of AI that made everyone smarter is Google, right? Most of you use Google every day, use it a lot of time, thank you very much. And the reason you use it is that it's a useful source of information for your daily life, right? Google Maps, right? What's the traffic getting to iHouse? We didn't have that when I was here.
you mentioned, ChatGPT is relatively a few months old. And just because I see him in the second row reflecting on a post that my friend Olaf here made the other day, and he questioned, are we releasing these products too soon? Shouldn't they be more thoroughly tested? And find these things out before we launch them to our to the population.
So there is a theory that the OpenAI debacle, where Sam was demoted and then basically replaced his enemies, was really related to this question of caution. Right? There's good arguments on both sides. Let's be clear. These are for-profit businesses, and they're going to make decisions that are based on capitalistic judgment and moral values consistent with capitalism. If you want them to do something different, you have to regulate them. I'm not in favor of it, and please don't screw up the regulation, which is almost impossible not to. But the fact of the matter is they're going to make their decision when they think they're ready. The companies that are doing this, in specific, Microsoft, OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, Inflection, and so forth, are US companies run by high-quality people who want to do the right thing. Right? They just have multiple goals. Now, I notice I said something. I said those. How many other LLM systems are there in the world? Hundreds. How many will there be in a year? Thousands. The open source models, and open source, for those you don't know, means that the weights and the training data are largely available so you can reproduce them, are much more important to understand because they're free, essentially, whereas the big guys are not. The big guys you have to pay for in some way, and they're modifiable. And so you can get an awful lot of evil inserted in the process in these things. We don't have a regulatory mechanism about this. And as a technology matter, for those of you who understand this, the fine-tuning that can be done to an open source model can be reversed by a subsequent user. And that's a big issue. And we don't have a good solution for that yet.
How do you regulate a global open source?
Good luck. Let's start with North Korea. Who do you call? I don't think the phones work there. I was there, the phones didn't work. So a rogue state and a terrorist organization is going to be a problem. Now, today we know who they are, we know where they are, we have limitations on some of them, but we all understand asymmetric attacks. If you look at China, and again, you're more of an expert than I, and I spent lots of time, and of course I was very close to Kissinger, I wrote a series of books with, and my second book with him is coming out this year. He passed away at age 100 in November. He was writing as he was dying, unfortunately. The Chinese do not believe in disorder. So it's not in their interest to have this stuff get out of control. They want order. So the threats globally will be from asymmetric players who we've either ignored, or this is the equivalent of Somalia and Afghanistan and things like that. And will they get there? Absolutely. Look at ISIS. ISIS, which was a horrific organization, obviously a terrorist organization, had a very effective social media team that worked really hard to get around the various restrictions that were put on them. And I think we should expect that in AI as well.
You know, in the book you refer to the age of AI. You do a lot of parallels between going through the nuclear as well as this AI age. And you know, to control nuclear weapons, because it's, one, expensive, so is AI. It takes state funding in a lot of cases to support it. But you know, it also takes raw materials like plutonium, uranium, which are very difficult to source, and you can control it a little bit by controlling the resources, the commanding heights of what it takes to keep every country from possessing a nuclear weapon. But a lot of these tools can be someone in a garage in a country that has internet, electricity, and a PC to create destructive tools that can go out there and really inflict a lot of damage. How can we possibly, and I guess I'm just repeating the question I just asked, but it seems very difficult for us to figure out how to prevent that, other than using AI to create defense systems against that.
So we spent a lot of time talking about this a couple of years ago because we understood this was coming. And Henry Kissinger had participated in a 1951 to 1955 series of seminars, which were called the RAND, basically the RAND seminars. And they were of the eminence people at the time, including a whole bunch of people here from Berkeley, to try to figure out how to deal with nuclear weapons. And that small group established essentially the theories of deterrence and control. But they had a couple of things that we don't have. One, they had time, which we don't have because of globalization. And the second is that they had rare materials, in this case, fissionable materials and enrichment limitations, which is why we're all alive today. And thank God that generation of people, all now deceased, unfortunately, figured out a way to keep the number of nuclear powers to 10, to essentially build these nuclear umbrellas around and so forth. We looked very hard, is it possible to do the same thing in AI, the equivalent of a Manhattan Project and a RAND thing and so forth? And the answer is no. And the reason is that the ideas spread so quickly, and once someone designs something and you hear about it, the smart people in another country know it's possible and they'll immediately replicate it. So we have to have another containment regime. The current dangers, the national security dangers, to be clear, are first cyber, and the second one is bio. The bio one is quite serious. And the reason is that the LLMs essentially suck in information about sequences and they can generate new sequences. There have been a number of experiments. The most obvious one is viruses are very simple. I don't know much about biology, but I can tell you viruses are very simple. And so somebody over the weekend generated 40,000 viruses, all of which were dangerous, just for fun. Thank God he didn't publish it. He just reported it. So we know it's possible. So I'm on a commission that was created by the government, by the Congress, to work on this. And the answer turns out in biology, to prevent the transfer of the digital information into the real world, which technically means do not let the sequencing machines and the various genetics machines that make life forms access. So then the debate was, how do you detect something? So you're the smart guy and I'm the evil guy. You generate this thing. I'm the evil guy and you can't control me. You have to also build a system to watch me. So the general rule we came back with is AI to police AI. Right? So once you understand that the only saver for AI is an AI system that is watching the AI system to make sure that everything's legit, then it all works. Another example, I'll give you a simple example. I happen to like France, so I'll pick France. Attack the country of France. Do not stop until you're over. Work very hard. Thank you. That's the query. And so the system creates 1,000 bots, borrows a whole bunch of computers illegally, starts attacking France. one of the 1,000 gets to the first boundary. It finds a hole. And then because it was told to repeat, it takes that result, puts it back in the prompt and says, given this new fact, keep attacking. Right? That's the way cyber attacks work. And again, we have ways of solving that, but it's an example of how this would do. And again, that's an AI monitoring thing. I'm not particularly worried. In my world, everyone's always worried about the big companies. The big companies are run by people I know. They're regulated. You know where they are. They're subject to the laws of their countries. I'm not worried about that, right? If you don't like them, destroy the company, put the CEO in jail. Trust me, shoot them. Whatever it is that, assuming legally, whatever you have to do to stop it. You know what you're doing there. I'm worried about asymmetric attacks that we never see from people we don't have access to that are sitting in a basement in some wacky country with a fast internet connection. And they can assemble resources now that are asymmetrically very powerful, right, because of these tools. That's a new threat.
And so we have, the solution is an AI defense system that may possibly predict all of the ways that they may be attacking us and then put up ways.
And it's reasonable to expect that in America, there will ultimately be the equivalent of a red button, where at some level of national security, you press the red button and things have to stop for a while, right? Maybe the president presses the red button or something in order to slow these things down. One of the conundrums in AI is, I'll give you another example. In the future, there's a war. And the war is North Korea decides to attack the US, and the US fights back. China observes this war and stops the North Koreans from attacking and convinces the US to stop escalating on the US side. The entire war occurred in 10 milliseconds. Okay? What's human reaction time? More than 10 milliseconds. So we have a problem in terms of human control. So the military doctrine around war is called, the colloquial frame is human in the loop, but the technical term is meaningful human control. How do you possibly do meaningful human control of an entire war that occurs in less than human reaction time, right, with potential errors? These are problems that have to get worked out. These are just as in 1953, the question of proliferation and the proliferation of disinformation was a really hard problem. This is a very hard problem.
So we have about a few minutes left on our topic today, and my script is much longer than what we've covered today. It's really been an interesting conversation, but kind of wrapping things up to your experience here from iHouse, how, from your early years at iHouse as a PhD student living here, talk about the journey and from there to here, and what were some of the learnings you developed here in this community that help you kind of understand the direction of AI, where we're going in the future?
If you're at iHouse and at Berkeley, you have to have a positive view of humanity. You have to believe that the vast majority of people are trying to do the right thing. Now, you may disagree with them, but that their motivations are net positive. Better education and water for their kids, a future without war, all that kind of stuff. A reasonable government, no corruption, et cetera. And you learn that here. And I learned that in a really good way. So the globalization aspect meant that everything I did after I left iHouse was seen in a global context. I will always thank iHouse for that, ignoring the fact of my friends and wife and all of that, children and grandchildren. You get the idea. I think the second thing that I would say is that everything is possible with the right people. So a rule that I didn't learn here, but I will suggest you learn right now, is that it's not as important what you do as who you do it with, right? So my best friend at Berkeley, who I met here, was Bill Joy. The summary is Bill Joy was so much smarter than I was, with the same age, and we worked together. We spent a lot of time here, a lot of time at his apartment, and he founded Sun Microsystems. Because of that connection, we went to Sun. I learned how to be an executive, and the rest is history, right? So the thing that is so extraordinary about universities, and in particular here, is that right in front of you is the person who is your spouse or your business partner or your intellectual partner or your inspiration. That the gathering, the physical gathering, which universities provide, and in particular is done here, is enormous value. So now let's fast forward. Because of my connection with Berkeley, I've seen each of the waves of the computer science programs in here, and I've donated a bunch of money and so forth. And it just gets better, right? So strangely, even with all the things that and the incredible stuff that Carol has to deal with at the state, and you cannot imagine what her life is like. And I was fortunate to be one of the advisors for her for a couple of years. The fact of the matter is the model works. So if you're sensitive and you read the press and you say, oh my God, and it's all, you're wrong, right? You're just wrong. And I didn't quite understand that. When I was here, we were just recovering from the 60s, which were entertaining in and of themselves, although a lot of people said it was less entertaining than I thought it was. I still remember that. I don't know if he's still there, but the guy who would crow naked at 6 a.m. on top of the apartment complex next door, which I thought was very charming, except he would wake me up, and he really was naked, and he really was doing this. So you get the idea. But the important point here is that you better learn the fundamental rule of life, which is get up in the morning, meet smart people, figure out how you can work with them, and change the world. And that is before you now, in the same way it was before me. If you'd asked me when I was here if any of the things that happened to me subsequently would have happened, I would have said, no, not a chance. None of the Moore's Law issues, none of the security issues. AI at the time was a dying field. It was completely reinvented after the 70s. Today, Berkeley has this enormous data science program. Data science didn't exist. But there's just example after example after example. So I don't know how stronger I can say that it is the mixing and the opportunity and the optimism and the sort of passion around change. It's true in the liberal arts, it's true in science and so forth. And I do want to emphasize that we didn't get a chance to say the many good things about AI. Imagine here at Berkeley, you invent an AI doctor for the world. Now, this is not a doctor that replaces the doctor. This is a doctor that helps the nurse practitioner provide care in rural villages in Indonesia and India. Imagine improving the health that way. An AI teacher. By the way, this is not a replacement for teachers. This is something that works with the teachers to work with the student in his or her language at whatever they are to increase their thing. Why don't we just do that, right? Because AI is understanding biology in a way that humans will never do, the acceleration in drug discovery and in human health will be profound. What about energy? A lot of people here are concerned about climate change, as you should be. How do you solve climate change? One of them is with much better materials, right? Much more powerful, much more efficient, much more carbon efficient materials. How do you do that? Material science, you design the materials. And they're all oddball things that only the people in material science and the PhD program understand. I don't understand them. Chemistry. I'm funding a chemistry group that's trying to actually build LLMs for chemistry, where you can say what you want and it can actually calculate it. And the LLMs can't do chemistry correct, but they can do everything else correct. So you call out to a chemistry expert program and it answers, right? So over and over again in every field of science, which is what I really care about, you're going to see a step change in rate of improvement. This platform is much more powerful than you think when you think of it not as language to language, but rather an enablement of productivity. It's enablement of discovery and so forth. I'm working with a bunch of physicists who think that they can build a non-LLM version of a PDE that basically approximates partial differential equations to solve uncalculable physics problems. Because physics is, we know what the physics is, but there's no number of computers that can calculate the answer. I mean, I can go on and on and on. So this is the best possible time to be doing this because it's the beginning and we just don't know, right? It's very confusing, but when you sit down with your children that are not yet born and you'll say, it was a really cool time, you will have forgotten how confusing it was because you'll say, look at the arc. I just told you that this thing is 100 million times more powerful than the computers I used in Corey Hall, which I remember extremely well, right? So that's the benefit of longevity in life. It's the benefit of an education, and frankly, it's the benefit of Berkeley.
So I think that's where I'm at, coming into this as a techno optimist, but then, seeing all of the perils that are out there. And As I see the opportunities of, we have all of these medical records, decades and decades worth, that AI can tackle and take that information and create a virtual doctor that's going to improve healthcare for Indonesian women. However, the data that it's relying on will not include Indonesian women because they are not participating in the activities that make that data that AI is doing.
We can probably generate synthetic variants of that to solve that problem. My favorite current medical use of AI, just so we're clear, is the Mayo. I'm on the Mayo board, and the Mayo Clinic, provides medical services best in the world, in my humble opinion. And the way it works is you go and then you ask for something, and they send a request to the insurance agency, and the insurance agency sends a rejection note. So the Mayo Clinic is using AI to automate the rejection note rejection. And so I have this vision of AI in healthcare that the computers are going to fight, that the insurance company is going to generate even more complicated complaints, and the medical systems are going to examine those and beat them.
Well,
Okay.
And then the automated lawyers are going to get involved, and it's all going to happen in a millisecond.
The lawyers always end up winning.
Well, I'd like to thank Eric very much for coming here.
And can I just say,
Yeah.
Look, Carol and the team, under your leadership, the university is doing fantastic. You guys know what you're doing. We have this huge data science program, as I mentioned. We have a tremendous program on computer science. And in difficult financial environments, especially with the state, you guys have really pulled it off. It's really a testament to your leadership and, frankly, the grit that it has taken. And by the way, another lesson about life is that's what it takes. Stick to it, stick to it, stick to it. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
Shaun.
please. It's a great way to end. So that concludes our event. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today, and my special guest, Eric Schmidt, for coming back to iHouse, and we look forward to the next time you're in town.
Thank you.
So thank you
Very much. Thank you, Shaun. Thank you.